this week's episode of the A to B podcast, I'm joined by Shane McCarthy. Having studied Business Information Systems in University College Cork, Shane completed his placement in Boston, where he became involved with a startup called Sandboxx. Today, Shane is a Chief Marketing Officer of that very same startup. With over 1 million users, 50 team members, and an annual turnover of 10 million euros, Sandboxx is a mobile and desktop app that connects past and current members of the US military. Hi, Shane. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Jack.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it, Shane.
Yeah, it's good to connect again. I know that we met in January at Stephen Ryan's 24 Stories in Cork, which was a lot of fun, and good to stay connected then on LinkedIn over the last couple of months.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was really interesting to hear your story at 24 Stories, and to be honest, I'm very grateful. When I reached out to you on LinkedIn, I was just chancing my arm, sent you a message. I was like, look, would you come on for the show? And you were more than happy to oblige, I hope. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to some of the other episodes of the podcast too. So looking forward to getting into this.
Great. I'm going to take you back to the start when you would have been in UCC and you studied BIS.
I did, yeah. So did my leaving cert in 2011 and then went into UCC from there and graduated in 2015.
And was there any particular reason you picked Business Information Systems? Were you kind of, I suppose, tech savvy as a kid?
Not really. I think it was just a case of, had an interest in the business side of things, didn't really exactly know what I wanted to do. So BIS was a nice kind of range of subjects when you get to touch on, parts of accounting, parts of maybe marketing, finance. Yeah, you have the IT, computer science element of it. So it's kind of a nice broad kind of field so that I could kind of maybe figure out what I wanted to do with my life over the course of like 4 years rather than, try to make it when I was, 18 and coming out of the leaving cert.
Okay. There had been a lot of marketing in the BIS course.
There was, and I think there might have been one or two options to do it all along, but I never actually did any. I don't think I did one course, all right, on psychology, I think in first year, but that was about it. And there was a lot of kind of pieces though on how people maybe interact with information systems and stuff like that kind of tied into marketing more than whatever I taught. And then you're sort of looking now at, how IT and stuff plays into marketing, this whole like MarTech side of things. So there's definitely an overlap there as well, and an understanding of the data and being able to do data analysis. So things that were potentially not traditionally marketing, but that are becoming a bigger part of that marketing mix right now, kind of tied in. But, that's not something that I was conscious of at the time.
Okay, interesting. And how did you enjoy Cork? You spent 4 years in Cork, so... How was that for you?
Well, I'm originally from Killarney. I'm sort of, my big thick Kerry accent is starting to wear off slightly. I've kind of, had to get into, particularly living in the US, had to slow it down a small bit. But yeah, really enjoyed being in Cork. It's similar to DC in a way. It's not as maybe big as Dublin or London, but it's still sort of a smaller, more tight-knit community. So really did enjoy my, 4 years there, and, obviously spend a decent amount of time when I'm back in Ireland, between Kerry and Cork as well.
Great. Yeah, I think I'll be doing the same wherever I end up. I'll always be coming home to the Rebel County. But in terms of your time in UCC, I think I could describe you as a bit of a standout student, not only with grades, but you many extracurricular activities on the go. You were the chair of the Student Fund Investment at the Hope Foundation. You were vice chair for the Entrepreneurial Society. You were the public relations officer for the Economic Society. And what I want to ask you about I suppose that side of the time you spent in those different societies and extracurricular activities. Why did you get involved in so many different societies and clubs? What was that drive when you were in college? Why didn't you just sit back and glide through your 4 years?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's funny how you mention it, I guess, in one way, not just what you mentioned. It feels like I'm kind of doing a job interview when you're talking about my grades and stuff. I think it was just when we were in, was it first or second year, we had there's an advisor that's kind of based around UCC. He was the Secretary General of the Department of the Energy and Environment, a guy called Brendan Toohey, and he came in and sort of said to us, look, if all you get out of your course is that you just spend time with just one set of people, and you get skills and training in just one very specific area, you won't have maybe made the most of that opportunity. And that's something that I took to heart. And then it was just a case of like getting involved and getting to meet a whole range of people. The Hope Foundation stuff was fantastic. You're getting to kind of give back. That the Hope Foundation is a nonprofit that's based in Kolkata in India, and you get to give back doing the work that they do with stuff like the student managed fund. It was just incredibly interesting. You get to meet people from the finance side of things. You get practical experience doing some of the investing side that maybe you wouldn't have gotten as part of your course. And then the same thing with ENS, which was sort of the Entrepreneurial and Social Society, who that was, I think, one of the biggest student societies maybe in Europe, and it got a lot of funding from the likes of Deloitte and Teamwork and stuff like that. And you just got to meet a lot of interesting people, and then a lot of trips abroad, things like that. So it was like, just a very different experience. There was a lot of fun with a lot of really good people that I'm still in contact with to this day.
It's great. I think it's kind of proves the point that just because you're in college doesn't mean you can't get that extra experience or even network, and by joining all of those different clubs and societies, you would have expanded your network by a bit, without a doubt.
Yeah, like you definitely, and even like some of the folks that I'm involved, kind of still talk to today, whether it's through, friends, buddies, even for like mentorship, or people that we brought in either through that to give talks at UCC, or even ones, another group that's based in Cork is IT at Cork, one of the industry groups, but getting to know some of the people there and being able to like catch up with them now when, we're running business and we're coming across problems, and it's like, hey, what would you do here? Or I need some advice on this or whatever else. So it's like, I guess it goes back to the whole Steve Jobs thing. You never really see the benefit in all of these things, but you can kind of connect the dots, kind of like looking back. But all of that stuff has been a fantastic way of learning, and kind of education outside of what I was even thinking originally.
I suppose clubs and societies aside, you would have gained a lot of experience even working, and that was before graduation and before placement even. In 2013, you worked with the Department of Education. So what age would you have been then? I mean, you were probably in your second year of college, possibly?
Yeah, I think that was towards the end of the summer of the second, maybe going into the third. That was, stuff like that came about through, I did some work with the Department of Education on the IT side, and also then with the HSE, and a lot of that stuff came about through some of the, obviously, there was like the networking stuff that, that I was doing, even though I don't want to put like the term networking on it, like, the thought that I was just going out like looking for business, or, there's just sort of like maybe a weird term, a weird kind of imagery that comes with networking, that you're just going out shaking hands and stuff. So it wasn't that way. It was just going to these events and sort of getting your name out there. I was actually doing a lot of blogging as well at the time, which was interesting. I don't really know how I got into that, but it was just sort of writing pieces online, putting them out there on my own personal blog. So someone had known someone at the Department of Education that was looking for someone to give them the help getting a project over the line, which was a database project for they were monitoring teachers and tracking sort of student resources and stuff like that. And, I think it was kind of 2 or 3 months of helping them get that over the line. And then similarly, I did a project with the HSE that someone had read a piece that I did on, change management or something along those lines, and had reached out through LinkedIn just saying, hey, you're going to be in Kerry for the summer. Can you help and sort of take on this 3 or 4 month project, which ended up becoming like an 8 or 9 month project, helping them, doing a changeover of one of their systems. So,
Wow.
it was kind of a, baptism of fire in some ways, but definitely stood to me in terms of experience. And even now what I'm doing in terms of, from Sandboxx's side of dealing with government, IT, all these different kind of pieces coming together. So again, it's funny. It's just like connecting the dots on the way back as well.
And in between the Department of Education and HSE, you were also a guest lecturer in the college. While you were a student, you also gave guest lectures. What's that about?
Yeah, you're definitely going through my fine tooth comb through my CV. when I'd been posting a lot and stuff online, and I guess, was kind of maybe standing out a small bit, I did a couple of guest lectures. There was one with like the Department of Epidemiology, talking to some of their researchers, PhDs, and lecturers about them getting the word out there. I guess it was becoming more and more sort of known that the more publicity you can get around some of your research, that helps with funding and stuff like that. So it was very much about them sharing their expertise. And then, did some work with it was the Department of kind of food science and entrepreneurship side. And that was sort of around how people interact with systems and information systems, and then also social media, and sort of how all of this stuff ties together, and sort of that, the interaction of maybe people with stuff around e-commerce. It's very much, I think a lot of people see, okay, we put the ad up there, we send someone to the site, they make a purchase, but there's all these other decisions and frameworks and everything else come into even getting someone through a purchase funnel and stuff like that. So it's talking about a lot of that stuff. And, it sort of helped having that information system side, as well as having an understanding of the psychology and marketing side as well.
It's mad. But as a student, did you feel at any point you were way in over your head, giving a lecture to, fellow students? How did you, go back to that kind of day? Like, what am I doing here? Standing in front of a lot of people. Like, how did you feel?
Yeah, I think some of it just goes back to like the whole like Richard Branson thing. If someone asks you to do something, you just kind of say yes, and you figure it out afterwards.
Okay.
But I think what you kind of find, that no one has, no one owns all of the knowledge. In order to stand out somewhere, if you read like 20 books on something or talk to 20 smart people, you're probably going to know more than, say maybe like 80% of people. So I think there's definitely a certain level of like imposter syndrome that comes into it. But, I think you just have to sort of push through it, and you get feedback from people, and you have discussions and stuff like that where people give their background. And, you mentioned 24 Stories with Stephen Ryan that we were at with Republic of Work, and I spoke at that in January, and you have all of these different people from industry at that, and like, who am I sort of to be telling them what to do around marketing or what to do, whatever. But it's not that you're lecturing to them. It's just sort of a discussion. Here's what I've learned. Here's what I've seen. It's not to say that that's right or it stands across every industry. It's just, this is sort of my experience. And I think once you come from that element of it and, tell stories about what other organizations are doing, I think it removes a certain amount of that sort of imposter syndrome as well.
Okay, that's you just share your knowledge. It's nice to see that. So come third year, which is placement year for a lot of students, you found yourself over in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who did you work for in Boston? What was that like?
It was a lot of fun. I think it was more so than what I thought. It was a bigger, kind of learning curve and maybe self-development curve and everything else, because you think, okay, I'm going to go. I was working with an insurance software company as a software engineer, and you sort of go over. You do your 6 months. Obviously you're moving away from home from that time. There's all of that stuff going on, but I think it's particularly for anyone else that's sort of listening to this, that's thinking about going. Someone kind of mentioned the point to me when I came back. They're like, oh, when you come back, like things will feel different in Ireland or university or whatever else, and they'll say, well, it's not that Ireland or university changed or anything changed in that 6 or 7 month period. It's more so that sort of you've changed and you've sort of grown and things are different and you have a different, view of the world and stuff like that. So I think that was definitely the case. And, from that, I think it gave me a real sense of the scale of the US and the scale of everything that was there sort of outside of maybe Cork and Ireland and stuff like that. So I think it was as much a learning curve on some of that point as it was on the, engineering work that I was actually doing while I was there as part of that sort of insurance software company that was still a relatively small size company. It was 100 or so people. There's, classmates went and worked at much larger organizations. But that's just sort of how the kind of pennies dropped in terms of, me ending up there.
And while you were over there, this is where you would have came into contact with, is it 2 former Marines for Sandboxx?
Yes. So it's funny. I guess I had moved to Boston in March. In July, our product manager at Agency Port, the company I was with in Boston, left, and I started Sandboxx with two former Marines. One was a Marine Corps general, the other Marine Corps sergeant, and I had sort of stayed in touch with him. We went down for a weekend. They were based out of Greenwich, Connecticut at the time, and I went down spent a weekend with them. And then as I was sort of finishing up my time in Boston, I had been talking to him more and more and just sort of, giving them some advice in terms of like from the marketing side and everything else, because they were launching their platform. And then they were like, "Hey, do you want to come on board?" And I was like, "Well, I didn't even think about it. I wasn't even thinking about getting work out of it. I was just trying to help out a buddy." And yeah, that's sort of then how I ended up transitioning into Sandboxx and working for them throughout my final year in UCC, and then ended up moving over here full time after that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because you would have spent 4 years studying BIS. You had a placement position that was essentially BIS. You'd worked in multiple software roles with the HSC as well as the Department of Education. And after graduation, you went straight into a marketing position. You were the head of marketing for Sandboxx when you first joined them.
Yeah. So, there's probably a little more crossover than it might look like sort of on paper, kind of as I mentioned before, the kind of when you're looking from a marketing side, particularly when you're talking about like, apps and stuff like that. And although this was still 2014, so like the first apps had been out for 6-7 years, it was an incredibly quick ramp up in terms of like the marketing technology side. Like Intercom was only out for kind of 2 years or so. HubSpot had just sort of done their IPO and were continuing to ramp up. So there was a lot of marketing tech and the marketing data side. And then you're looking at stuff like Facebook ads, where, it was definitely a benefit if you knew how to, knew your way around Excel and stuff like that, because their internal tools, their ad tech tools were pretty bad at the time. You kind of had to take some of the data and stuff out of it. So there was definitely a need to have some level of probably tech skill more than others. That said, was I like the perfect marketing hire in terms of knowing everything, in terms of maybe on the brand side, brand marketing, product placement, all of that type side of marketing? No. And I had to kind of, get up to speed with that stuff very quickly, along with, not knowing, you have an Irish guy in his 20s who's now talking to like military generals and stuff like that, and talking to them about their experience and the benefits of the platform and stuff like that. So yeah, you talk about like imposter syndrome, like you definitely have a bunch of things like kicking into play like all at once there.
And that's where you really had to kind of slow down the Kerry accent. You're saying you had a lot of difficulties at the start.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I think it's, with that and probably with some of the, trying not to swear or whatever else, or yeah, particularly when you get nervous that you're not talking too quickly if you're giving presentations and stuff. It definitely all ties into, it all ties in together. And, I know I get kind of a slagging when I go home at Christmas about, like they've kind of Americanized you, or, the guy is sort of like, the Yank is kind of home, but it's, there's certain, I think, words, that I probably do say that are, kind of Americanized now, but it's not, it's not, I'm not doing it purposely. It just happens from living here for so long,
You graduated in 2015, and then the big move to Washington, D.C. came. And for a lot of students who might be studying in Cork, or they might be studying in Limerick or Dublin, Ireland is their home. They know it too well. Mm-hmm. And obviously to move straight after graduation, and even to go into a role as high up as you did, what was that like for you? Would have been 23 years of age, maybe, moving over to Washington, D.C., leaving home behind to start up a career, and a startup at that, So there definitely would have been some, maybe not doubt, but no guarantee that company would have grown to where it has today. Was there any like doubt in your mind?
Yeah, looking back, there probably was. I think, it was probably, I think it was just a case of like, look, go with it. If, world comes to an end, the business, fails, which, a large portion of startups end up doing, that we, the business ends, that, I can come back and I'll figure something out. And, I'd kind of known enough people through, my time in college, I could probably get, some other role doing something else. But I think it was just wanting to go and try and do something different, particularly while I was younger, and sort of take that risk. And it just, like, I think like everything, it was just interesting. Like that was one of the main reasons to go do it.
Hmm.
So you know, I think, you can overanalyze some of this stuff, but it was an excuse to travel. It was an excuse to go try something new and different. And it would have probably stood out on the CV anyway, even if I did end up having to come back.
Yeah, certainly wouldn't have been the end of the world to know your career. So you probably made the best choice. And you've been there how long now?
Yeah, so I've been there. I've been over here, 5 years, I guess, 5 years
Wow.
now. And I guess, there are probably things, that I'm kind of glossing over in terms of you come over, you're working with a startup, you, in a lot of places here, you put down like 1 or 2 months rent, particularly if you're, new, you don't have a credit score, stuff like that. And you're nervous to sign a 12-month lease because you don't know what's going to happen and all this other stuff. So there was definitely a lot of things there where you kind of get nervous about and that are hard to plan out. But yeah, I think you just sort of roll with the punches and you just go with it and you kind of embrace that level of uncertainty and change. And I maybe kind of found a certain amount of that exciting, whereas working in, sort of maybe a 9 to 5 role mightn't have, excited me or, pushed me as much as I wanted to either.
Hmm. And I suppose Sandboxx, for those of our listeners who don't know what it is or might not have heard of it before, what exactly is Sandboxx? And what was it like working the first few years working for a startup like that? What kind of services did it actually offer? What was the product at the very start?
So the product at the very beginning, Sandboxx is a platform for members of the military and their family. We've over 2.5 million customers that use the platform now. And the initial product an idea was you have someone who's either deployed overseas or who's going through their 3 months of training over here and they're not allowed to have their mobile phones on them. So you take someone who's 18 to 24 years old and you take their mobile phones off them, and they've no way of contact with the outside world other than through the postal system.
Hmm.
So the initial concept was, you write a letter on the app, you add a photo, you hit send, and then we print and deliver it next day. And we also include return stationery for the person to reply back with. And, to date, we've sent, over 5 million letters that way. And we've sort of built out the product then to do more. We have a news site now that we, sell advertising on. And we run, different campaigns for large organizations. And then we, also do training content for people joining the military, and we work with the different parts of the Department of Defense in pushing out that content and informing service members and their families of their programs and stuff like that. So it's grown into something much bigger in terms of what the initial concept was. So yeah, and then in terms of like the early days of doing that stuff and the early days of being involved in a startup, like number one, there's very few people there. Right now we have an entire customer support team of military spouses and veterans that are incredible at doing what they do. But back 5 or 6 years ago, there was no one doing customer support. It was effectively me doing it in the evenings after sort of the marketing side of things, and you're trying to throw everything at the wall, everything at the wall, see what sticks, what tactics are going to work with different parts of the audience to sort of engage them. And you're sometimes you have some money to run ads, sometimes you don't, depending on what the return on ad spend is, depending on have we raised money, all these other things that come into play. So it's really a case of like you're just in the weeds all day, every day, trying to get some level of traction, trying to get product market fit. And it's fun because if you're shoulder to the wheel and finger on the pulse every day, and you're talking to customers every day, and you're trying to like talk to them and get them to sign up like individually, get them to sign up. Whereas now we could have thousands and thousands of customers signing up every day. Whereas back then you're sort of like, oh, we 20 people sign up today. This is awesome. And everyone is like, high-fiving each other. But, things just scale over time then as you kind of see what works and where you need to invest more time and more money.
Hmm. And I suppose on the kind of resources side, when Sandboxx was first in its startup days, from what I remember you were saying at 24 Stories, was there a free office space involved at one point where you literally were thrown into an office space? What was that story?
Yeah. Well, we'd been based in Connecticut and had moved down to DC, sort of to be closer to the Department of Defense and sort of all the subsidiaries and stuff around here. And we had moved down, and we were kind of in between, raising some money and all that other fun stuff, and we're looking for office space. And yeah, we were given office space by these two great guys who were actually both veterans that were running an incubator, and they were like, "Here, take this space for however long you guys want it,
Wow.
and just sort of run the business out of there." There was, fair enough, there was no like windows or anything in the office for like the first year, but those are the things you do. You want to keep aside money to put it into marketing and put it into hiring new people, and office space in DC is expensive, so you just have people that sort of believe in the business and that like what you're doing, and kind of give their help and time in a bunch of different ways, which I think still stands true to this day. Like, there's still people that will give you time to talk to you, run through ideas and all that stuff with you. But yeah, definitely very grateful for, people like that helped out in the early days when you're still trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah, I can definitely. I'm going through the same right now with this podcast. I've reached out to people I never thought I would have, and people have been very generous with their time. But what I want to know is from, I suppose, a customer journey standpoint when it comes to Sandboxx. Let's say today I joined the training troops. Is that what you'd say in America? I suppose the troops.
Yeah, you'd be going through, you'd join the military to go through boot camp or whatever else.
So it's my first day. Mom and dad drop me off. I give them a wave, and I'm walking inside this massive, I don't know, PE hall or some sort of an office space. How do I first get introduced to Sandboxx? I've never heard of it before. My friends haven't told me about it. I walk in. What do you have inside the induction? How do you first approach your customers?
Yeah. And the thought, I think you've like maybe over romanticized, the thought of mom and dad dropping them off at sort of the PE hall side of things. Like, generally someone will go through like a day of medical processing where they'll do all their bloods, get some of their inoculations, all that stuff, make sure that
Wow.
they pass like a certain level of the fitness test. They do their swearing in, make sure they've no major, criminal records or anything that'll disqualify them from shipping to boot camp. Then they'll put them on a plane and they'll fly them to wherever, one of the 10 training locations in the US that they're doing their training. And then
Wow.
from there, you're put on a bus. Actually what they do in some locations is they'll put you on the bus and they'll just drive you around in circles. Like, this is at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So to make you feel like the base is huge, and to sort of disorientate you a bit, you then come off the bus. They'll just start screaming at you. They'll make you, everyone line up, and you then start doing the in processing. And it's sort of that initial thing of like kind of shock and awe, I think is what they call it in some of the branches, where they just try and like snap you out of this sort of civilian mentality into like, okay, this is now real. Like, this isn't a summer camp type of thing. So then
Wow.
what we do is, we can meet them in many steps along that journey, whether it's in, potentially one of like, the airports or whatever else that they may see, Sandboxx advertising. They may see advertising on the phone. They may get told about it by their military recruiter who helps them throughout this process. Or, with one of the military exchanges, which are the stores on bases that we work with, that one of them will, kind of share Sandboxx with them or whatever, works through that. And then from there, like, all of that stuff expands out at a macro level to us, ending up signing up about 60 to 70% of everyone joining the military each year then through that process. And, a lot of that then it builds over time, and a lot of it gets word of mouth. So before anyone even goes through their medical or anything like that, they'll already know about Sandboxx. So I don't want to oversimplify us, just plugging into one or two key areas. Like, it happened over time, where all of these different parts of the marketing journey kind of all connected together, and all these touch points are connected together as well.
Okay. And other than the, I suppose, mailing system you have, there's also a voucher system. Am I correct in saying that, where you can get family members to sign up and kind of, for Christmas or for a birthday, they can basically pay for a voucher, a Sandboxx voucher?
Yeah. So what it actually is when you're on a military base, all the stores on bases are run by what they call the military exchanges, which are the equivalent of a military Walmart that are run by the government.
Wow.
And they're, any of the profits they make go back into like running the gyms and the childcare facilities and the, the welfare and recreation programs. So what we do is we actually allow family members to send gift cards to their loved ones. Yeah, whether it's coming up to their birthday and you want Johnny to be able to like buy a watch or get something when he's maybe on his leave or whatever else. So yeah, we or users then send millions of dollars worth of gift cards every year to their loved ones, which is awesome from our standpoint, because it's just another benefit of the product. But it means that this money is then getting spent at that military store, which any profits are then reinvested back into their communities and stuff as well. So it's kind of a real win-win for sort of everyone involved.
Of course. So obviously you profit off of that a small bit, but that money also goes into the welfare of that community, which is nice to see.
Yeah, exactly. And it's it's just another thing that kind of comes up when when we were kind of spending a lot of time talking to customers. We saw this as being a potential pain point, and then we were talking to the folks within the government and the Department of Defense. We saw the need for them that was there. So it was sort of just lining it up where there was a win there for everyone, and sort of then being able to get that over the line, because obviously sometimes it's hard to do different parts of contracting when you're dealing with government and when you're running innovative projects where we're taking a digital gift card, converting it to physical because the service member won't be allowed to have their phone on them. So there's a lot of different moving pieces that come into even arranging a contract outside a contract like that, even outside of the marketing piece. The marketing piece ends up becoming easy when you get all the tech, the legal, the compliance, everything else sorted, the finance, treasury, all of this stuff that comes into it. But it's, it's cool. And then it's all the customer sees is a one-click purchase. And then they get to send a gift to their loved one.
It's great. It's just that convenience and accessibility is what you're kind of pushing there. And as much as marketing is involved there, your background in BIS certainly would have helped in kind of looking at the process and trying to ensure that would be as simple as possible for the customer. And I think when it comes to marketing, you can write all you want and, you can order videos to be made, but you have to understand it from a technical standpoint as well, which not all marketeers can. But I would assume, considering you came from a BIS background, you understood those systems a lot more than just your average marketing student.
Yeah, and I think the big thing, and even from, say, people that we hire and stuff now, like it's not like you don't have to be, say, tech savvy or know how to code or like, know how to use Excel or, anything like that. But I think it helps to be able to understand some of the language and have those conversations across the board with different team members. And I think that's sort of where I've seen people excel the most in their sort of careers and move up the ladder quicker, is sort of like, okay, I don't need to understand how the Python code works behind any of this stuff, but it's just being able to have that conversation with people in terms of like, oh, this is and an understanding of maybe how long some of this stuff is going to take to develop, to engineer and stuff like that. So I think all of that stuff kind of ties in together. But for anyone that's looking, to move into marketing, probably take a look at doing some online courses just to know the basics on engineering or development or whatever. And I think even out of curiosity, because everything that we touched today is sort of based on some level of, e-commerce and tech and code and whatever else. So like, it's definitely worth having an understanding of that.
When you first joined Sandboxx, it would have been the two founders and you assisted with marketing. So was it just the three of you for the start?
Yeah, so I guess it was the two founders, the CTO who would have been my product manager, yeah, and then me. So that was it for a while. And then as the business was picking up and bringing on, and seeing where there was areas that needed help and that were sort of sort of cash positive in terms of like, okay, if we bring on this person, they're going to be able to help generate, more revenue and whatever else. Like they're going to pay for themselves. And then sort of built the business up from there. So yeah, that's kind of how that sort of thought process worked.
And how many people does Sandboxx employ now?
We have about 50 people, I think.
And are some of them kind of, I suppose, working from home? I suppose everyone is now, but pre-COVID, would you have had all of those people in the office, or were some of them freelancing, or were some of them kind of temporary basis?
We had, yeah, about half the team was remote pre-COVID. A lot of the people on, so kind of or customer happiness team, which is, customer support, is under marketing and, works with marketing. So a lot of those people were remote pre-COVID because they were just different time zones. A lot of them were either military spouses or veterans who had retired in in certain places across the US. So it just made sense, rather than having everyone in a DC office, that, or people in California or Guam could work the later time zones, for example, and sort of be online then more throughout the day. So yeah, it was interesting when we started going remote. I think those people were actually nearly more affected than some of the other team members, because, a lot of them would have been used to working at home, but they would have been used to having, their kids in school and stuff like that. And now the kids were at home, and it sort of changed that dynamic. But I would say, all of those folks were doing, an incredible job remotely and still do. And I think it takes a certain level of self-discipline, definitely. But I think we were almost moving towards more of a remote working environment even pre-COVID. We have people everywhere from Guam to Ireland. We have someone based out of Kilkenny. So, there's differences in time zones, and, you can't be watching people that are in the office, stuff like this. You have to make sure you're setting, good goals and people can follow them, and there's metrics, and it's sort of like a results oriented work environment as well.
And that's important for you as a CMO, to be able to delegate that work and to be able to trust your team with that. What I want to know is, when does it happen? Because I'm interested in that kind of growth stage. When does it happen that you go from head of marketing to chief marketing officer? Was that because you brought in more people, or did you say, oh, I want the new role? Like, when does that come about? And if there is any difference, what is the difference between a head of marketing and a chief marketing officer?
I think at a company of our size, there was no, there's no major difference. It's really just sort of, and it's almost depends, in certain ways, kind of like comically, on who you're kind of talking to at the time. So, it could have been, so if we were talking to someone within the government on just in relation to, I'm trying to come up with an example on the top of my head, but say some of the like social media stuff that we were doing, like I think back in the early days, it was probably more commonly referred to as like a social media guru in an introduction, which for anyone that works in any kind of marketing, it's sort of, cringeworthy. But I think from the folks that we were talking to, it was something that, people were excited about, because that was a big key term that a lot of people in the government were sort of looking for at the time. So I think there was no major planning in terms of titles or anything like that. I was the only person doing marketing for the longest time, for the first kind of maybe like 2 years or so. So there was no real thought went into titles. It was just a case of like, put your head down and kind of get on with the work. In terms of like generally in an organization, maybe of our size, where we would have, say, like sort of a marketing manager or whatever else, and then a chief marketing officer. The marketing manager maybe doing more of the day-to-day work. The chief marketing officer is sort of maybe kind of coming in and out of more meetings, doing more client development work, sales work, stuff like that, meeting with different partners. And then also just sort of reviewing stuff across the board, whether it's in terms of high level metrics or contracts and stuff that are coming in, and sort of giving sign off on stuff like that. And then also saying like, hey, we want to launch campaign, A here, and we want to launch campaign B on this base. Okay, well, we're actually doing something else with group B over here, so we can't do that. It's going to be a conflict at the moment. So I think just different things like that, sort of making the, making sure that the trains run on time to a certain extent.
Overall direction of marketing, I assume.
Yeah, and then there's also a lot of tie-in as well. Even though what I would say is that the marketing and our engineering team work, extremely closely. Like they're almost blended teams at this stage. But definitely in the earlier days, on the CMO side, spending more time with the CTO, which helped because I'd worked with him previously in Boston, and sort of mapping out what are some of the things and experiments that we want to run from a product standpoint and making sure that we're on the same page. So there's definitely like an overlap there in terms of working with different departments and things like that as well.
Another thing to note is not only are you chief marketing officer for Sandboxx, that is currently growing and has grown quite a lot in the last few years. I suppose back to the point where you said you weren't networking for the sake of getting jobs, you weren't looking for something, you were just trying to help people out. You're a board member for the Hope Foundation.
Yeah, so sort of I've been involved with the Hope Foundation since I was in UCC. You'd mentioned that I was kind of chair of the Hope Foundation Society and set that up within UCC, and was sort of running events and different fundraisers from them, and sort of awareness from the the university side. And then I'd moved to the US, and they were setting up a US board, and sort of they asked me to get involved there. So was more than honored to help out in any way that I could. And then when there was a position came open on the Irish board, they asked me to sort of get involved there, which would be their sort of the main headquarters being based in Ireland. And again, it's sort of like it's a way to give back. The work that they do with some of the poorest people in the world in Kolkata. I really like their model of, we don't want to be doing the same thing 10 years from now. We want to sort of help people help themselves, lift themselves out of poverty. There's an entrepreneurship element to that as well as a health element. And sort of building from there, as well as, getting to work with other incredible people on the board and within the organization, learning from them. I think all of those things coming together, it's sort of hard to then say no, when you're kind of asked to get involved with something like that. And it's, it's a small way of sort of giving back as well.
I think it's important, even when you're clouded with work, and obviously you have your personal life, you still have that time to give to the Hope Foundation, which is very nice to see.
And I think because I think it's even from you could say you're kind of crazy with work and stuff, but it's a nice balance to be able to take some time out and look at something else and do maybe some slightly higher level, sort of problem solving and kind of strategy planning and stuff like that. That's more in the longer term, and getting different perspectives from different people. You get to work with people that are in, that are in top positions within finance and consulting and public health and government, and it's just a great way to learn from all of these incredible folks as well.
Shane, thanks so much for being a guest on this week's episode. Before I let you go, we're going to move on to a quick rapid questions round. Are you ready?
I think so.
Okay, great. Would you rather work from home or would you rather work in the office?
Or work from home.
What Irish slang word have Americans loved you saying the most?
Maybe not slang word. Maybe I'll go with phrase. But we've Irish investors who used the term a couple of times, that he would peel an orange in his pocket, and I think it took a lot of Googling for him to figure out what that actually meant. They weren't referring to me with that. They were referring to other people, just for the record.
Are you a morning person or a night person?
Morning person.
Would you rather attend a game of baseball or basketball?
Basketball.
Would you rather be a member of the Navy or the Air Force?
Oh, yeah, you're going to get me a lot in trouble in the office with this. I'll go with the Air Force, and I won't try to justify it because I'm only going to annoy people at work regardless.
Fair enough. I assume these are conversations you have in the office. What is your favorite book of all time?
I would go with maybe something like Business Adventures, which was on Bill Gates's reading list like 6 or 7 years ago. I think it just tied in a lot of different things together. So yeah, I would recommend people go back and take a look at that.
What app on your phone do you use the most?
Probably Slack or email.
What's more important, a degree or experience?
Experience. Yeah, experience. Yeah, I think.
How would you define success?
I would say it's good relationships with family, good relationship with your health, and then the sort of commercial or business side at the very end.
Tea or coffee?
Tea.
What's the best piece of career advice you've ever been given?
Probably, if you can't say network and chat with people and stuff like that, reading is, a way that you can effectively, I think, Bill Gates had said it around effectively downloading people's brains and thoughts and stuff like that. Reading is a great way around education. And then also, there's a lot to be said for just hard work and sweat equity as well.
When distant or older family members ask you what you work as, what do you tell them?
I think I just say marketing, and generally it ends up with some convoluted thing about me doing something with the military that no one understands. But I just try and keep it to marketing.
Shane, thank you very much for being a guest on the podcast. I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best of luck with your career.
Cheers. Thanks, Jack. Yeah, and enjoy your final year in CIT, and same thing to all of your classmates as well.
Appreciate it, Shane.